today. Our newsmaker is Michael Rubin. Michael is a former Pentagon official. He is presently with the American Enterprise Institute, the AEI. Thank you very much, Michael, for joining us this early, your time of day. We appreciate it. Let me start by asking you your thoughts on where and how the crisis stands right now.
Well, the United States is simply hoping that this exits the headlines, that whatever has happened can be addressed much more quietly. They don't think the spotlight is useful for U.S. interests, let alone for the broader partnership. That said, look, the United States has taken a more serious line towards Khalistani separatism and Sikh extremism. We've seen this with the arrest in Sacramento last April of 2017. We've seen the nexus of gun running, drug smuggling, and so forth. And so behind the scenes, I believe there is some frustration with Canada as well, that it has become such a weak link on these efforts.
That's interesting that you say that behind the scenes there is some frustration in America, because the U.S. Secretary of State's comments in public seemed to lean towards Canada, was the perception of many pundits here in India. When you heard Tony Blinken calling upon India to cooperate with the Canadians, talking about condemning what he called transnational repression, what did you think? Did you think that was just rhetorical, or did you think that there might be two views in the United States on how to handle this?
I think that Tony Blinken was trying to square the circle. I certainly did not hear an outright accusation against India. I mean, simply saying there should be an investigation can go either way. Within the intelligence community, I'm pretty certain there's frustration with Canada for even acknowledging and putting the United States in the position to reveal the sources and methods. That we spy on India and we spy on Canada for that matter, that shouldn't be a surprise. Frankly, India spies on both of us as well. Democracies do it. It's a different quality than what we might have. I mean, if Russia does it, if China does it, and so forth. But I found the transnational repression statement a little bit worrisome. Now, and also hypocritical, if I may, considering the United States does things like this as well, meaning we will take out Osama bin Laden, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, Qasem Soleimani, and others. What I worry about moving forward is not the State Department, it's not the White House, it's the Congress. Because too often now in our political, polarized society in the United States, foreign policy has become a national security football. India's strength, our relations, have been that it has been bipartisan. We haven't worried whether it's a Democrat or Republican. What else could George W. Bush, Barack Obama, Donald Trump, and Joe Biden agree on than on India? But if congressional progressives decide they want to make an issue of this, I'm afraid of what that could do in the long term to U.S. relations with India. We've already seen what it's done with U.S. relations with both Israel and Saudi Arabia.
So in a way, you're worried that the bipartisan sort of support for better relations with India could be damaged if this is not contained very soon.
That would be my worry, though honestly, it's not a huge worry right now. Look, Khalistani extremists based in California have embraced Hinduphobia. They've tried to go after Prime Minister Modi at every opportunity, and it hasn't stuck yet. What we're going to see now is a test about whether their efforts, and their efforts aren't organic, they're being directed from outside, whether their efforts have any gravity. I don't think they do. I think U.S.-India relations are going to continue to thrive.
Let's talk about what's happened in the last few hours. Khalistani groups threatened to shut down Indian consulates. What happened in the end was a pretty muted affair, but you still saw Khalistanis, if we can play those images, surround the Indian consulate. But we've seen much worse happen before. In this instance, you had the Indian flag being burnt, you had the Prime Minister's effigies being burnt, you had all of that happening. But in the past, we've actually seen tableaus celebrating the assassination of an Indian Prime Minister. You've seen Kill India posters putting a mark on the back of Indian diplomats, literally endangering their lives. And you've, of course, seen the notorious Air India bombing, which till 9/11 happened happened and the Twin Towers came crumbling down was the worst episode of its kind in global aviation history. And yet Canada sent only one man to jail for those killings, in which 329 people died. And even that man was released ahead of time. Why is it, you think, that the world or the Americans have not made noise about Canada's patronage of Khalistani terror? Give me a second. Let me unmute you. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. Sorry.
I hate to say this, but I think the reason is not enough Americans have been killed to gather our attention. Americans famously navel gaze. We can be self-centered when it comes to our own national security. We don't understand that other countries, other democracies have their own interests and have their own groups who are trying to destabilize their democracies. That said, the silver lining for this episode will be that no one will ever again ignore in the United States or Canada, if they're wise, Khalistani extremism, Khalistani terrorism. We had a start of a wake-up call in the United States with regard to the attack on the San Francisco consulate. You're absolutely right on that. I would add that the United States has been slow to hold people to account. Of course, there's surveillance video. Why aren't we going after the people who perpetrated the violence? We shouldn't let this get so far that Americans end up dying. And at this point, I think that certainly in the intelligence community and now at the political level, people realize that this is a huge issue and that we can't be serious in regards to our own counterterrorism if we don't attack and address this issue. And I would also just add, there's a growing acknowledgement, perhaps, that, the Khalistani extremists have no domestic legitimacy whatsoever. I would say, based on a study group at Hudson Institute that Hussein Haqqani had led, that, the Pakistanis had tried to stir up terrorism in Kashmir. Kashmir has thrived. I was there last year, ever since the abrogation of the cancellation of 370. Now that Indian Kashmir is doing better than Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, Pakistan's simply trying a plan B, which is to try to destabilize once again Punjab. We can't be naive about this. If Prime Minister Trudeau wants to be the ISI's useful idiots, that's on him. But the United States shouldn't fulfill that role.
That's a very interesting comment, and I'm glad you brought up the Pakistan connection, because that Hudson Institute study that links actually that actually looks at Khalistan as part of Pakistan's playbook is very critical, and I'm glad you've made that link. Do you think the U.S. administration gets that? And I ask you this because there's a lot of attention in our part of the world, and the U.S. ambassador to Pakistan's visit to Gilgit-Baltistan, even the American ambassador to India has been questioned on it. Do you think that the American administration gets this link? Because the American media, or large chunks of it, doesn't seem to. They continue to describe Nijjar as a plumber, as a community leader, as an activist. They don't seem to be willing to use the word secessionist, extremist, or terrorist for him. So can you speak a little bit about this ISI link and your concern that Trudeau's willing to be the useful idiot of the ISI? Great quote, by the way. Go ahead.
Well, I don't think the United States fully appreciates this at a broader level. But first of all, let's understand the United States can be very provincial at times. We tend not to understand much about the outside world, not to have focus. Indian media is now all over the globe. American media, because of financial cutbacks, tends not to be. And so people are getting their information secondhand. Where do they get their information from? Oftentimes from the loudest voices. They will see a protest in Sacramento, California, for example, and assume that that person is legitimate. The fact of the matter is, those who are most often on Twitter, those who are most often staging these protests, are not the mainstream. This is the message which the Indian government needs to start to give. Now, I'm very, very glad that after months, more than a year, of not actually having a confirmed U.S. ambassador in Delhi, we now do. And it behooves that ambassador to make this a priority, because when a U.S. ambassador goes to Delhi, he represents U.S. interests, not Indian interests. But in this case, there's a symbiosis. We are the two world's largest democracies, and we both have a mutual interest in terrorism, not destabilizing our countries. The flavors of terrorism which may target our countries may be a little bit different, but that doesn't mean we can ignore each other's security concerns. For too long, the Americans have ignored everyone else's security concerns, and prioritize ours. We need to address all extremism, all foreign-backed extremism that targets democracies.